Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to the Have You Met You podcast. I'm Sasha Pearl, your host, the energy architect, and I guide soul-led women in building their authentic six-figure businesses by aligning their identity, their message, and their branding using my highly potent method. So let's get into it. So this week, I had to take off last week because I literally was dying from God knows what I had. But it was really fascinating. I'm just going to talk about this a little bit because I feel like I have built a business that I am capable of taking off a full week due to unforeseen circumstances where I literally couldn't breathe through my nostrils and I could barely talk. So I couldn't even record the podcast last week, which felt very like, really? This is happening right before, like right as I start getting consistent with this podcast. And for me, this intentional idea of white space or unintentional last week really created this moment of wisdom and depth that, oh, when do we actually ever create intentional white space to be bored, to be horizontal, to just be resting like a human should, especially as a non-sacral, non-energy being? I'm a projector, so I do need a lot of rest. And I think that we can really run into this tendency, especially as women building businesses, where even though my energy type is deeply, deeply feminine, I must create the masculine structures, which I do love to do. I love systems, I love efficiencies, and I love workflows. But in order to do that, we are moved out of our zone of geniuses, being in our feminine, and moved into the masculine of setting up these structures, of setting up these boundaries to really then set the foundation for our feminine way of being. But when we're constantly in the output of the doing, we are in an imbalance of our energetics and of our day-to-day lives and in our businesses, right? Like the more space that we can actually create for ourselves, the more time that we can have to really build that insight and that perspective to then share with our audiences. Because I think there's sometimes when we are consistently showing up and we're creating this visibility, people are like, oh, they have it all together. And it's like, newsflash, we don't have it all together. We literally do not. We are just flying by the seat of our pants, being like, is this working? Is this working? Are we doing this correct? Are we doing that? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So I just want to really normalize that this human design energetics in your business always needs to be met with actual business strategy. So I will never be like, it's only energetic, blah, 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 blah. Like that's just like not, I'm a Taurus. Like, let's be practical here. Right? So I just want to normalize that not everyone has it figured out. Maybe some do, but I would really question their sanity. And normalize that it's okay to rest, to pause, to create the sacredness of space in our bodies, in our environments, because we are literally the byproduct of all of our environments, and really understanding that that is where our gold lives. It's in this idea of embodiment of what you are sharing, of what you are practicing. Like if you are selling a product you have never taken yourself and you've never taken yourself through and you've never experienced it, and you're only coming from your mind space and sharing that, it's not going to resonate and it's not going to land as deeply as something that you have deeply embodied, that you have deeply experienced. So I just wanted to share that because I felt like it was really profound. As simple as it sounds, it was a lot of tension last week of like, oh my God, I keep having to move meetings and this week is going to be insane. And it has been. And also what a gift it was to have the space, the time to just be horizontal, watch as much TV as possible. And Dan, I crushed some Netflix and Hulu and Paramount Plus shows. So, but I came back this week feeling, I mean, I still am not 100%, but feeling a lot more like, okay, I'm ready to go and do this. Because here's the thing, I feel like when we are like, quote unquote, resting, we're not resting. We're working out, we're going to the sauna, we're doing all the things that we just didn't have time to do versus just being like, how bored can I get today? How can I set the intention of how bored can I fucking get today? You know? And yeah, I am now blocking off intentional white space on my calendar to hold the revelation of space, the sacredness of space, the sacredness of the void, the sacredness of the unknown, because that is where we actually can start hearing ourselves, where we can hear those light pings and those nudges to then go move forward. Because when we're in the constant doing of things, we forget our way. We we like create decisions based off of from our head, and we're not actually embodied in the decisions that we're making. And that is what human design is so beautiful for. And that is why human design is such a magnificent system, because it is so practical, actually. Even though it deals with everything that is non-energy, everything in the intangible world, we know what it feels like, even if we can't put words into something, that we don't like it, or we feel neutral, or we feel really excited by something. And sometimes you don't know why. This is where the system comes back to our purest form of energy, and we can really understand our gifts from a logical sense. But then how then can we bring it into this world and bring it into a tangible way of being, right? And so this is where I really love teaching human design. I don't want to just give you the information from like a head place and like, oh, that's great data to know. I want you to start experimenting. I want you to start embodying this new way of being in the world, because the more that we can actually integrate the information from our head into our bodies, that is actually what human design is about. Human design is the science of our aura, right? And so every time we're looking at a chart or looking at our charts, yes, it's like a crazy numbers and channels and shapes, and it's very overwhelming, but it actually holds the roadmap to your authenticity. Our authenticity is going to be our highest form of creation. And imagine the world that we get to create when we are creating from our highest version of self. And that is what I'm deeply passionate about teaching other women in business, and how we can really build an authentic six-figure business just by being who we are, and also aligning the strategic aspects of building a business. I have done so many trainings. I've been running a business for 6 years. I know what I'm doing. And it is just so goddamn exciting to take masculine structures and then rebuild them from a feminine way of being. And in doing and being put down pretty forcefully last week, I got to really experience what that space meant and what that void and the wisdom of the void really meant for me. So what I want to talk about today are our centers. So in the previous podcast that you should go and listen to, we talked about our energy types. So our unique way of being in the world, our unique role that we're here to play out. We talked about our authority, how we make decisions in the world. We talked about our strategy, what emotions show up for us when we are in alignment and when we are not in alignment. We talked about our profile lines, that is our personality, and how we are uniquely showing up in the world through our profiles. And now I want to talk about obviously human design is very nuanced, and there is so much to this system, but I want to give you guys a basis and a foundation to really look at your chart and fall in love with it. Because I'm like looking at my chart right now just to give me a visual to talk through and keep me on track. And I'm like, I fucking love my energy. I fucking love my chart. I fucking love all of my gifts. And this was something I used to judge. And now I'm like, oh my God, the more that you can be in alignment with who you are, the more that you can show up in your authenticity, that is where you can see your gifting. And people will start reflecting back to you how incredibly beautiful you are, right? And then to be able to then reflect it back into your charts, oh my God, it's actually magical. So we're going to go over the centers today, because our centers hold what we are consistently able to access. And when we are defined, or they're colored in, those shapes are colored in our charts, we have consistent access to those. And those are going to be some major themes that we deal with in our life. And then anywhere that we are open, we are literally amplifying other people who have those defined. And we're also taking in the conditioning of the world with them as well. So we have completely open centers, and then we have open centers with defined gates in them, right? And so when we have open centers, these are where we're going to have the biggest amount of conditioning coming from, right? And so what's beautiful about human design is that they come with a whole slew of questions to ask yourself, is this showing up for me? And then understanding like, oh, wow, this bitterness, I'm a projector, so my not self is bitterness. This bitterness is showing up because of my open center of the root that has a lot of defined gates in it. Am I rushing to get things done? Right? And so starting to ask yourself these questions and then being like, okay, how can I stop rushing things to get them done because I'm trying to prove my worth or I'm trying to meet someone else's deadline? How can I actually slow down and create boundaries and space for me to just be with what I'm creating versus just check it off on a checklist, right? So that's just like one example of how we're going to go through each of the centers from the bottom up. So we're going to go from the root up to the crown, and I will give you a question to ask yourself if your not self is showing up here, right? And so the not self can also show up in your defined centers, but they're going to be mostly showing up in your undefined centers, right? Because you're going to be taking on conditioning from other people. So with further ado, we can begin. So first, I want to go over quickly the energy types and then their not self and signature self, because the whole goal for me as guiding, as someone who guides you in your business to really create from your highest frequency, it's really, my goal is to get you into your signature state of being, because your signature state is your most aligned, your most authentic state of being in the world, right? Which means that you are going to be the most magnetic, and that is where you're really going to be wanting to manifest from. And remember, you cannot manifest when you are dysregulated. So the more that you are in your signature self means that you are in your most regulated state. So quickly going over, for the energy beings, for manifesting generators and generators, your not self is going to be frustration. So, how do we move frustration into your signature state of self, which is satisfaction? You're here to live a deeply satisfied life. Okay. And then for the manifestors, not self is going to be anger. Your signature state is going to be peace. Projectors, your not self is going to be bitterness, and your signature state is going to be success. And then for reflectors, my little babies, you are meant to live a life that is deeply you're surprised by. So surprise is your signature self, and then your not self is disappointment. Okay. So when we are looking at our charts and we're looking at these centers, they all hold a different theme, right? Because these centers are actually your chakra system. And so they hold the themes in each of those centers. So now that you know what your not self is and what your signature state is, we're going to go through each of the centers, and then I will give you the not self question to ask yourself, why is this causing you bitterness, anger, disappointment, frustration? Okay. So let's start with the root center. The root center is is at the very bottom of the chart. Okay. This is a pressure center. This is a place where if you have this defined, you do really well under pressure. You are really good at taking a lot of different tasks and being able to prioritize them. You're really good at creating timelines and all of those other things. You have motivation and drive, and you know how to really deal with stress management. So you have a consistent ability to handle pressure and transform it into action. So it really provides a sense of drive and urgency that can help you achieve goals and get things done. So the shadow side of this center is constantly feeling like you're under pressure to perform, to get things done, rushing through tasks. You're feeling overwhelmed by deadlines, or you're operating from stress rather than ease, right? So the question that you can ask yourself if you're an undefined root center or if you're a defined root center is, am I in a hurry to get things done so I can be free of the pressure? So this is really interesting because when we look at this holistically, this is part of the circuitry that we look at in human design in my highly potent human sessions. And when we have the undefined root center and undefined head center, think of it as like a pressure cooker, right? So just knowing that you're going to be in overwhelm and have a lot more anxiety than other people if you have the root undefined and then the crown undefined. Okay. So moving on, into the next center is our solar plexus. So, our solar plexus rules our emotions. So, if you have this defined, which a majority of the population does, you live in high highs and low lows. This is a definition of someone who can be moody. We'll dive deeper into this in a different episode, and we can go over all of the emotional waves that you can have depending on what channels you have coming from the emotional center. And if you have this undefined, this is someone who is an empath, someone who is going to be the one amplifying someone with a defined emotional center, someone who's going to be riding other people's high highs and low lows. But this is someone who has an immense amount of empathy and can deeply feel into the other people's emotions and feelings. I always say people who have an open solar plexus, ask yourself, are these mine or are these someone else's? Because you could be pulling in energy from other people. So the gift of the solar plexus is really being able to have that emotional clarity, and you get to experience life in a deeply intense way. And I feel like this world has conditioned us to believe that being an emotional being is bad. It's not. It's actually deeply regulating, especially when you honor your emotional waves, right? So if you have this defined, that means that you are an emotional authority, which means when you are making decisions, you must make decisions from a place of neutrality, and your truth is never going to be in the moment, okay? So the undefined shadow question that you can ask yourself, especially if you're not selfish showing up, is, am I avoiding confrontation and truth? So this is someone, because you can feel so deeply, that you can then also be suppressing your emotions or avoiding tough conversations or trying to keep the peace instead of honoring your true feelings, because sometimes it feels easier to just be like, I can hold it and I'm not going to say it because I don't want to deal with that tension, right? So just making sure that you are honoring your emotions, because those emotions is what is the wisdom of the body showing up for you. Okay. Okay. And then moving into the spleen center, this is going to rule your intuition and your fears. So if you have this defined, you have a really good understanding of what is healthy for you and what is not healthy for you. You have consistent access to your intuitive gifts, and then you'll know what intuitive gifts you have based off of which gates you have defined there. And I'm sure I'll talk about that in a different podcast. With the open center of a spleen, you hold on to things for longer than you need to, right? Depending on what relationship you're in relationship to people you're around, you'll have different types of intuitive gifting coming through. And this is also someone who doesn't necessarily have a good sense of knowing when to let things go and when to keep going. So when you meet someone with an open spleen, that would be me as well, and you have a defined spleen, they're going to feel like they're at home with you, because you're going to bring a sense of, wow, I feel like I finally understand what it means to feel well and understand what safety feels like, right? Because having an undefined spleen is one of the oldest centers that we have, is about safety and like understanding your intuitive knowing to stay alive, really. So the not self question of this center is, am I holding on to things that aren't good for me? So a good indicator is, again, always coming to your not self of bitterness, anger, frustration, or disappointment, and asking yourself, especially if you have an undefined spleen, am I holding on to things that aren't good for me? And then if that's a yes, which it probably is if you're not self is showing up, how do you move yourself back into your signature state of self? Okay. So moving into our next one, which is our sacral center. And this is the center that if you have this defined, holds consistent access to your desires in the world, to your life force vitality, to your sexuality, deep creative energy here. Okay. This is, if you have this defined, you're either a generator or a manifesting generator. So you are an energy being. And this, when you have an open sacral, you have inconsistent access to your energy, right? So when you are in relationship to someone who has a defined sacral, you're going to be living off of their energy source. And so when you leave them and go away, you might feel really exhausted because you kept saying yes and overcommitting to things, okay? So shadow aspects of an undefined sacral is overcommitment to things, is forcing yourself to do things out of obligation or ignoring your gut responses to things. So the not self question of the undefined sacral is, am I saying yes when I really mean no? And I talk a lot about this for generators and manifesting generators, especially sacral authority, because you have the energy to do whatever the fuck you want does not mean that you need to say yes to everything. Okay. And so being really honest with what you want to show up for, because if you're committing to everything, then you're really committing to nothing. So if you can really discern what feels really good to show up for, that is where you are going to be in alignment. That's where you're going to be in authenticity. And that's where you're going to be the most magnetizing, right? Because manifesting generators and generators have the most open and magnetic energy there is. Okay. And then moving to our undefined heart, ego, will center. Literally, I think it's only 30% of the population has this defined. But this is ruling your willpower, your self worth, and commitment to the things that you commit to. So you have a consistent drive to achieve all of the goals that you want in this world. You feel like you do need to prove yourself, and that is energetically correct for you if you have a defined ego. And you are naturally capable of following through on the promises and commitments that you have. So when you have this undefined, you are going to struggle with your own self-worth. That is one of the biggest lessons that you are going to come into this world to really learn. And any of these open centers, this is where you become the most wise. And this is where you get to really learn the lessons of each of these open centers because of the conditioning that happens from them, right? And so when you are in a work environment, especially if you're a non-energy being with a completely open ego center, you're going to try and overexert yourself. You're going to try to overcompensate. You're going to try and add on so much more to all of these like money commitments because of the exchange. You're not really going to understand what your value is or what your worth is until you understand it, right? Because it's not something that you inherently have access to. So this is going to be a lifelong process of really understanding your worth, your value in the world. And spoiler alert, you are worthy of anything that you desire. Okay. And so the shadow question here, do I have something to prove? So people with the open ego have, and the signs of conditioning here is overpromising on things, pushing to prove your value, or feeling unworthy unless you really achieve something. Okay. So again, looking at where your not self is showing up, looking at the themes of the centers, and then asking yourself those questions. Where am I trying to prove something to someone? Okay. And then moving to our undefined G center, or to the G center, which rules love, direction, and our own personality. This is the magnetic monopole. So this is what people who have this defined attract the direction into their lives. And this is really beautiful I really love when people have this open or defined. I think this is a really cool center. And this really has to do with your identity. So when you have this defined, you have a fixed personality in any situation that you show up in. You feel like you have a clear direction and you literally attract love into your life in all forms. When this is undefined, it's not that you don't have that, but what's beautiful about the undefined G is that you get to be whoever you want in whatever moment that you want to be it. So you are the true chameleon of when you have this open, you are a true chameleon. This really makes you good at sales too, and even design because you're really able to hop into the souls of other people. This is the soul center. So when you are in relationship to someone who has this defined, you are amplifying who they are in the world. And you also get to like be in their soul for a moment while you're in relationship to them and when you're talking to them. And the shadow side of the undefined G is trying to constantly seek what your purpose is, to constantly force relationships or like you feel really lost if love isn't there or identity or direction. But the thing is that you're not meant to have a fixed identity. You're not meant to have a fixed direction. You're meant to be exactly who you are in whatever moment that you want to be it. And I know that feels so unnerving in a lot of ways, but it's also really beautiful because in whatever way and part of life that you are in, you get to be whoever you want to be. And that is really cool. And so when you are even in like coaching session, if you are a coach, you are literally amplifying the other person. Like you can see deeply into the soul of the other person. You're able to then coach and guide from that space. Okay. And so the not self of this center is, am I looking for love and direction? Because the more that you're forcing an identity, the more that you're forcing love, the more that you are forcing direction, that is when you're in your inauthenticity. You're not self. Okay. And then our throat center, we're moving up the line to our throat center here. Our throat center is our communication, our place for manifestation, right? All roads lead to the throat. So, in the human design, if you look at it. So, with the throat center, if you have a defined throat, when you speak, people want to listen to you. Your voice lands for other people. And there's so many gates in the throat that we'll go over at a different time, but that will show you where you are meant to, or like what the themes are for how you express things into the world. Okay. And this center is a place for manifestation. So the more that you can speak it out loud into the universe, the more the universe is going to be like, okay, I got it. Let's go do this. Yay. And then with an open throat, you are like the the voice of self-love. Like you get to help amplify other people with defined throats. And open throats do have a tendency to either overspeak or not talk at all, but they don't have as much of discernment when they speak. They kind of just go la 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 doc 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 and don't have as clear of a way. Like it just kind of like it's like very nonlinear when they're speaking is how I would like to say that. So some conditioning signs of an open throat or an undefined throat is speaking out of turn, forcing yourself to be noticed, or feeling the need to prove your value through your words. And the not self question here is, am I trying to get attention? So really just looking at if you have an open throat, are those signs of conditioning coming up for you? Okay, now moving up to the head, the ajna. I feel like our society has conditioned us to really live from our ajna and from our ajna state, our mind. We have been celebrated for being strategic, for being logical and data oriented. And this is where when we are constantly operating from our mind, we're actually in authenticity from our body, right? If our mind and our body are not communicating, then we're not aligned in our decision making processes. So the ajna is all about our mental processing, right? So this is when you have this defined, you have a linear way of thinking of getting from A to Z. You have a very fixed way of thinking. You could be like hard headed or um, stubborn because you're going to have a harder time flipping directions and changing perspectives when you have a defined ajna. So if you have an open ajna, you're going to feel like, or you are going to be able to process things quicker in a nonlinear way. You're going to be very open-minded and be able to shift perspective pretty quickly. With this, you can feel pretty overwhelmed, though, with the amount of information that's coming in, because with a defined ajna, you can have pretty clear discernment on what is the priorities that you want to start thinking about versus when you have an open ajna and crown, it's kind of like, I have all this information coming in and I don't know how to discern it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So also with some signs of conditioning for an undefined ajna, you feel like you always need to have the answer. So you're like, oh, I have the answer. And then it's like actually probably wrong. And you're like, why did I say that? Or you're just like, I'm just going to go with it. Right. You always feel like you have to prove your intelligence, but you're already inherently intelligent. Or you feel like you have to be mentally certain, right? Like there's an overcompensation when you have an undefined ajna. So the not self question here is, am I trying to be certain? And then the last center we're going to talk about today is going to be our crown center. So that sits above our actual mind here. And I call this like the divine center. This is like a deep connection with otherworldly things, the ethereal realm. And if you have this undefined, or everyone has connection to source, if you have this defined, this just means that you collect inspiration from yourself versus the outside world, and you are inherently inspiring with this defined, right? This is also a pressure center. So when we look at the undefined crown, it just means that you are going to be, again, more open-minded. You're going to um, really love being in like coffee shops or art places or marketplaces to really gain inspiration from the outside world. And that's how you get like really inspired. So some signs of conditioning for this center is feeling the pressure to figure things out. You overanalyze things, or you stress over the thoughts that aren't even yours. So when someone has this defined, they're actually really good at prioritizing what the thoughts are. And you can only have a defined crown if you have a defined ajna, right? The not self question is, am I trying to answer everyone else's questions, right? Because you're so concerned with all the questions coming in that you want to answer versus asking, what is the most important question that you need to answer to take the next step forward? Okay. And those are the centers that we're going to be talking about today. And we can obviously, there's so much information for each one, but I wanted to give you a high level version of them all. So you could really start playing around with this and really looking at your own circuitry and like your own gifts of what defined, what's undefined, where's my not self showing this, and what are these questions that I can ask myself to really move myself back into your signature state, which is your authenticity, your most aligned version of self in the world, right? And again, everything is an experiment. Life is an experiment. So try things on, see what works, leave the rest, right? And that's going to be a wrap for this pod. I'm really excited for next week. We're going to be bringing on Lindsay Lee Anderson. She's one of my besties, and we'll be talking about how she's created her personal brand. She is I believe it's a 5-2. She's a 5-2 manifester. She's a manifester nonetheless. We'll dive deep into that next week, and we'll just talk about her journey with entrepreneurship and building her personal brand on the pod, while also simultaneously looking at her chart and asking her a little bit more about like what comes up for her when she has a defined or this channel or undefined center. So I'm really excited to bring her onto the podcast and really, see what she has to say. And again, with everything that I just taught today about the centers, you can really dive deep into all of this with me in my highly potent human sessions, which is a 60-minute human design reading. And you also get a customized report and then the recording after our call, because on the recording is actually the most important part, because everything starts to really unfold after you get initiated into, through my voice, into this world of human design. Like a lot of other things are like, that I get it now. It makes sense. And if you want to dive deeper than a human design reading and really start seeing how we can use our unique energetics in our businesses, I developed an accelerator program called Signature State of Business. It's an accelerator alignment for your business. And we hop on 3 one-to-one calls, get you a business roadmap, and start really aligning every aspect of your business to you. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I look forward to hearing from you. Okay, talk to you later.